So I'll entertain you a little bit about my big dreams as we settle down for what's going to be a fantastic afternoon as we get into the videos and the trends and the aspirations and the true truth of what people aspire to. I was actually very touched and moved by the people this morning, so I basically threw out my speech that I wrote last night, and I'll just talk about a little bit about myself and how I basically came to be here. And I'll do this all in 5 minutes. So I grew up in a neighborhood called the Lower East Side in New York before it became very fashionable. Today, I can't afford to live there. But when I was growing up, it was a slum. And most of my friends and I lived on the cusp of poverty. They weren't poor, we weren't poor, but we were almost poor, and it always faced us. And some of them, over time, would slip in and out of poverty, which is an interesting dynamic people don't often talk about. But the prospect of falling into poverty and falling into having to eat government food. I remember a lot of my friends and occasionally my family would have what we would call commodity cheese. The U.S. government subsidizes its farmers to grow things that they very often then throw away. Sometimes they recycle it, and when I was growing up in the 60s, a lot of the cheese sort of went through welfare and churches, and we would get these big blocks of cheese when we needed to eat, and there wasn't a whole lot of income there. So, but it wasn't very often, but it was there. We played in the streets, didn't have any playgrounds. Every spring we would go in back of the tenements where there were yards, but they were pretty messy and we'd have to clean them up. And they were often, I used to dream about this, they were full of rats. So our spring cleaning would be to create a baseball field by getting rid of the rats with rocks and sticks and things like that. As a kid, it was an interesting game, and we had a lot of fun, except the occasional time someone would get bitten and then they'd have to race off to the hospital to get shots. So there were very limited options in life growing up in this neighborhood. You could do, if you were a boy, and they were very strictly divided by gender. If you were a boy, you could get a job as a cop, as a policeman, or fireman. Those are considered really good jobs. You could be a hero. But more than that, it was a steady income and a pension. You could be, if you were really lucky, you could get into the post office. My dad was in the post office. He was considered very lucky. So there were government jobs. That was one category of things you could do. You could become a priest. A lot of people became priests. Again, there were certain sacrifices to becoming a priest. At the same time, for a lot of families, it was a steady income. And it was also fairly prestigious. So for me, with a last name like Nussbaum, it wasn't an option. So that part was left out. The other job that you could get if you were a boy was crime. The mafia employed a lot of people, and a lot of people went into crime. In fact, some of the best people who were good in mathematics, went into crime. Today they go to Wall Street and commit other crimes, but when I was growing up, it was officially criminal. So there were, that was it, really. And then, of course, there was the army. And since the U.S. is constantly at war, there were always jobs for that. And a few people did that. For girls, it was even more limited. You could become a teacher, you could become a nurse, and it was always considered a temporary job until you got your real job, which was to become a wife and take care of your children and take care of your husband. And that, again, that was it. I would say for half my friends, that was good. That was their life. That was tradition. They were happy to deal with that. And some became cops, and no one became a policeman, partly because in New York at that time it was all divided by ethnicity. You had to be, how did this work? I think you had to be Irish to be a fireman. And of course Italian and Irish to become a priest. So some became police. A lot of people became, a lot, 2 or 3 out of my, let's say, dozen or close friends became priests. And two of my smartest friends went into the mafia. And they're still there. Hopefully, they're still there. After a while, I lost contact with them. And there you go. For me, it wasn't enough. And for a number of my other friends, these options just seemed too limited and oppressive. And all that I wanted to do, and all that a couple of my other buddies wanted to do, growing up in this neighborhood, was to get out. I wanted to lead, and somehow I learned how to express this. I think I had good teachers in public school, and it sort of came out. I wanted to lead what I considered an interesting life. And I didn't think I could lead an interesting life staying in the neighborhood. I could lead an okay life, but it wouldn't be an interesting life. So from the time I was really a little boy, I wanted to lead an interesting life, which is a fairly abstract kind of concept, especially for a slum kid. And much of my life since then has been in search of that, of leading an interesting life, meaning of learning about things, learning new things, and creating things as I went along. So I went to a public college. No one on my street had parents who'd gone to college. And we didn't know actually how to go to college. My parents didn't know how to go to college. They kind of knew it would be good for you, like, medicine. It's good for you. So they would say, go to college. But they wouldn't tell me how. And I didn't know how. And my public school was an okay school, but they really didn't know how to get me to college either. They expected me to become a policeman or a fireman or something like that. So the college admissions office at my high school, never existed. But I wound up going to a local school, and I can't remember anything that I did there for 4 years. It may be because this was in the 60s, and